Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
I think you can see my instincts is to do everything I can to make Britain a great place to do business and to invest.
And I would say this to you. Do you know there's not a single person on the Labour front bench, not one, who's ever set up or worked in a private business? Not one. The Tories, not much better. And what we're saying is, I think we've got more idea of what makes the economy tick than either the current Labour or Tory parties.
Nigel Farage and Rachel Reeves there, duelling for the title of being the party of business. The question is, which one are companies wanting to hear from?
Hello, you're listening to Bloomberg UK Politics. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm James Woolcock.
Well, we're coming to the end of summer, sadly, James. That means I'm pulling out my trainers so that I can get around all of the party conferences and all of the events in Parliament because, of course, MPs are back on Monday. And so we have the last of our series looking at Labour's next tests. And James, you've been gathering some really interesting research about party conferences, which are, frankly, only a few days away.
Where has the time gone? I'm already packing my suitcase. And yes, exclusive polling is what I'm packing away into this little carry case. We've been working with the Chartered Institute of Public Relations and Opinion to try and understand, as we come into this year, what businesses are paying attention to. And lobbyists are lining up, Caroline, to attend Reform UK's annual conference next week. Now, 20% of public affairs executives said in this survey that has been done exclusively for us that they are heading to Nigel Farage's event in Birmingham next week, even though the party has only 4 MPs. And the thing you really have to know is last year, only 12% of the people we surveyed went. Year before that, 4%. In polling terms, that is quite a significant increase. The Liberal Democrats never got above 10% attendance. For the Conservatives, 24%. So this poll does really establish Reform as a mainstream or near mainstream party. Take a listen to what the head of public affairs at Opinion, James Crouch, had to say.
You can't ignore them anymore. Whether or not this trend continues and whether or not more resource will eventually be put into them, I think that depends on how the headline polling goes over the next year. And we'll be looking particularly intently at the next local elections, because that would be the next electoral sign that actually Reform are in contention for government, and you definitely won't be able to ignore them.
So to me, it's the latest marker that Britain and the corporate Britain are increasingly taking the Populist Party seriously as an electoral force.
No, I think that is fascinating. Bloomberg's Lucy White reported only recently that Reform UK are expecting their biggest business turnout ever. The 5 big lobby groups, the ones that we pay attention to a lot, and some of the kind of advisory PR groups are also going. Most of the groups telling Bloomberg that they're only sending people to observe. But my question in all of this is, does Reform UK actually have a clear economic policy? When I interviewed Nigel Farage at the start of this year, we looked at the manifesto promises. I mean, they were very thin, and Farage admitted in that conversation that they needed more work.
But I have to say, despite all of that, Caroline, if you look at the public polling, Reform are consistently the most popular political party in Britain, which, rewind 2 years, that would be totally unthinkable. Joining us now is Jon Gerlis, who's the head of public relations and policy at the Chartered Institute of Public Relations. So Jon, help me understand, why are the people who want to influence government policy, your members, increasingly going to Reform?
Well, thank you very much for having me. I think it's a case of businesses now starting to understand and reflect their own practices in what the polls have been suggesting now for some months, that Reform are a serious political force and are potentially going to be quite influential over the next few years and come the next election. Lobbying is, of course, as much about influencing policy as it is about understanding. And so when you have a party like Reform, who's relatively new and who has a relatively limited but fairly strong policy ask, there's an opportunity to both try and influence that policy ask and help the party understand the implications of what it is they're asking for, but also try and help their businesses, help their clients understand what it is that Reform are actually interested in and actually talking about when you get past those sort of headline policy asks. So I think everyone's in a bit of a learning experience and exercise at the moment, where there's a lot of introductions and a lot of cases of trying to understand how to engage with the party and what sort of asks you should be putting in front of them.
Tell us a bit more then about what your survey also showed, because I want you to put it into context for us, the interest in Reform UK's conference versus others. I mean, you spoke to small, medium and large size businesses. You asked about the different types of executives. You know, is it the CEO that's going to be going to Reform UK versus Labour or Tory events, or someone junior? Just give us a flavour of what you thought was interesting out of all of this data.
There's some really interesting findings. I think, as you mentioned in your introduction, the fact that the conference has sort of doubled in terms of the number of people and number of lobbyists and businesses looking to attend compared to this time last year is obviously quite significant. It's telling how close the numbers are compared to Labour and Conservatives, considering the number of MPs that Reform have in the single figures. You can count the number on one hand, and yet they are not too far away from the Conservatives or Labour in terms of attendance. They very significantly outnumber the number of businesses attending the Liberal Democrats party. And when you consider how many more MPs they have, that is quite telling. The influence, not just necessarily on the benches of the of Parliament, actually is still quite strong when it comes to someone like influential figures like Nigel Farage. The types of people that are attending, there are still fewer C-suite and director level executives attending Reform. So more junior staff are attending, and that probably goes to the point I made earlier about trying to understand, trying to actually get a sense of what it is that Reform are talking about. It's not just a case of going in and trying to lobby there and then, but actually to sort of listen, engage, hear what members are talking about, hear what the parliamentarians are talking about, hear what people who are interested in Reform are talking about, to then take back to their businesses and try and actually understand what it is that they need to do to actually frame their messages to then make the most impact with this party that, as we say, in the next few months and years is probably going to become increasingly important.
So I remember reading last year, Jon, that businesses were very upset when they went to the Labour's party conference because they didn't get any face time with any of the kind of the big cabinet figures. So could I ask you to take us behind the curtain of what a lot of sort of your industry actually does at conference as we go into conference season? What does success look like for you guys when you go to these kind of political events?
It can look like a number of different things. So first of all, simply being there and telling your customers, your members, if you're a trade association, your shareholders, that you're obviously engaged in these political debates and these discussions is quite important. They're incredibly useful for networking, so meeting other businesses and hearing about what other businesses' priorities are. Most importantly, as I say, it's really about that kind of listening piece, going into fringe events, going to receptions and trying to hear the kind of messages that parties are thinking about, for the next political term. Now, if you're particularly lucky, and yes, if you have got pockets big enough, you can start to do a bit of engagement yourself. This does come at a cost, but you can organise your own fringe events where you might get ministers or MPs sitting on them, talking about the particular subjects that you're interested in. You may even get meetings with parliamentarians, with special advisors, with backbench MPs if they happen to be attending, and you may even get private meetings. Having said that, they are quite popular events. They're, traditionally they're an opportunity for members of those parties to essentially engage with what it is that the party that they're interested in are talking about. They've become a little bit more useful for businesses over the last maybe decade or two. So success can be very different things for different people. Everything from just being seen to be there and engaging on a political level to meeting ministers and having those kind of conversations. They do come at a great cost. And so lots of organisations will have to find, budgets to send people to have them stay, and obviously then to have stands or to run events as well. So depending on the size of your business may influence the sort of activity that you're able to do there.
As you pointed out, Nigel Farage is a hugely influential figure. You only have to look at his online presence, the number of followers that he has, or the way that he has moved the debate in the past few weeks over immigration, which has also a significant business angle to it. I want to ask you, though, whether you've also alluded to this, that the economic policies of Reform UK are at the moment quite narrow, but they might be quite forceful and quite strong. Does anybody at this point think that Reform UK has credible economic policies to deal with really difficult issues in the UK, like indebtedness? I mean, all the political parties before the last general election were criticised for really not addressing that fundamental problem for Britain.
It's really interesting. The conversation that a lot of people have tends to turn quite quickly to reforms policies. Whereas interestingly, anecdotally at least, I think a lot of the reason for their surge in the polls over the last year or so is not necessarily down strictly to those policies, although I'm assuming that there's many people who are sympathetic with those. A lot of it is down to the mistrust and the really fundamental issues that people have got with the, I guess, more traditional and established parties. So I don't think reform have to necessarily have a full mapped out and detailed economic at this stage. At this stage, they understand that there is such deep frustration and mistrust in the political system that even headline figures is enough. Now, that is concerning for some businesses because businesses want certainty and they want to understand how they can work within a system should reform get into power in a few years' time. It also gives a really good opportunity to businesses because at this stage, you've got some headline policy asks. There's potentially a good opportunity to influence what it is happens underneath those headlines. So what are the potentially unintended consequences of some of the asks that reform are putting forward? Yeah. Do businesses need to try and educate reform officials about what that means for local communities, what that means for the business community in their particular sector, what it might mean for a particular industry that is heavily reliant on one, particular big workforce in an area. So it does come with challenges. Businesses do like certainty. They do like to know where they stand, and they are largely sympathetic with a lot of what Labour is saying at the moment. But they have to understand that actually a lot of what is driving the polls is not just driven by policy asks. It's clearly driven by the fundamental change and the difference that reform are offering compared to the traditional parties. What you'd like to see is the party listen to businesses so that actually there can be some sensible policy asks and understanding of how business really operates in the real world, so that some of these headlines that they're putting out there can actually reflect some of the real on the ground concerns that businesses are facing.
So you mentioned there the unhappiness of business with the mainstream parties. Are Labour still the party of business?
Yes, because they're in government and they're going to be in government for a few years, whatever happens. So the challenges that we face here and now, and there are many, as we've already mentioned, the economic climate, needs, some real concerted concentration to get it back on a sort of level playing field and even keel. There is obviously a very real need for businesses to be engaged in the government at this stage. However, the government isn't the only way you can influence policy. And while we're talking about reform, it's important as well to recognise that there are other parties and other parliamentarians, in the Commons and, of course, in the House of Lords as well, where you can still find yourself able to influence policy in a number of different ways. Now, that could be, backbenchers asking questions. That could be through APPGs. That could be through debates. It's not simply a case of just having to engage government. There are and should be the approach, I think, to all parties and all parliamentarians, and any smart lobbyist will be engaging their businesses and clients in how to do that and who to target. But in terms of whether or not Labour is still the party of business, that they are, because they're in government, and they are still talking very significantly. If you listen to anything that Rachel Reeves or anyone in the Treasury says, they are still very focused on that growth agenda and getting their economic policies through. So there is still significant need for businesses to be engaging with Labour.
There's one word that's been missing from this conversation so far then, isn't there? The Conservatives. How far do your members still care about the Tories?
So the polling showed that the Tory party is still an incredibly well-attended conference. It always has been. It's got a huge membership and political those that are engaged in the political debate are still engaging in the opposition because they still have a significant number of MPs. They can still influence within Parliament quite significantly. Having said that, there's clearly a suggestion in the public polling that the Conservatives are being pushed back into third place at the moment, and therefore their influence is clearly waning. And I think, as I said earlier in my previous question, you know, a good lobbyist and a good political advisor for businesses would be, you know, exploring opportunities for businesses to talk to all parties, you know, and that's individual MPs that might be either based in constituencies or have a particular interest in an area. So they're certainly not being discounted. They're not being ignored. But with budgets, you know, having to be justified, and the polling suggesting that we're heading in a particular direction when it comes to an election in a few years' time, and Labour in power for those few years, clearly businesses are having to put their money into areas where they can get the most attention, the most focus. It's also probably true that the Conservatives got quite a few MPs that are already well established, and so businesses may have already have those relationships in place. Reform is a very new political party. So although they've only got 4 MPs, it means that actually getting that hearing is a bit more difficult because you've got, you know, 4 parliamentarians who are trying to hear from lots of different businesses. They've also then got a slightly new machinery in terms of how they engage with lobbyists as well. So there's a lot of, I would say, a lot of interest in how to simply introduce yourself to reform at this stage. So probably a lot of focus is going on that, whereas Conservatives, you've probably got channels that are already open.
Okay, well, making new introductions, maybe we will hear from you at Reform UK's conference then. Jon Gerlis, the Head of Public Relations and Policy at the Chartered Institute of Public Relations.
My thought really at the end of this is Reform UK wants to perhaps portray themselves as a radical new broom. Is that what they are, given the frustration with the failure of the past? Or is it about inexperience, about untested policies? They've got a long list of costly policies. And are they really, between now and the next general election, going to face the reality of Britain's very tough tax, spending and debt questions? I think that, you know, business leaders and economists are going to want to find out a bit more.
All of this comes back to that famous book, you know, How to Make Friends and Influence People. And as we get into conference season, the thing that comes after that is always the autumn budget. And with Chancellor Rachel facing very difficult sums, as you just alluded to, for me, it's not just how well reform makes friends, it's can Labour keep its friendships with business as we head into quite a difficult period for the government.
Yeah. That's it from us for today. If you like the programme, don't forget to subscribe. Give it 5 stars so that other people can find it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify or wherever you listen.
This episode was produced by Freddie Fulston and our audio engineer was Andrew Gavin. I'm James Woolcock.
And I'm Caroline Hepker. We'll be back with more next week. This is Bloomberg.